The Canadian Grand Prix weekend was just as wild as I expected. The highs were incredibly high and the lows were utterly heartbreaking, giving us some very clear winners, some big losers, and then Haas. Poor Haas. Will the pain ever end? Today we're going to talk about the success of Red Bull, the struggles of George Russell, Williams doing things, and then venting on the behalf of all 6 of the fans of Haas. So don't go anywhere. We're going to have to start calling Max Verstappen Max Verklocken instead, because he's winning races as reliably as a good watch ticks. Untouchable and unchallengeable. He's in another league this year. He's led every single lap since the Miami Grand Prix. Sure, things looked a little closer in Canada, but don't fall into the trap of thinking anyone is racing him. The circuit Gilles Villeneuve hosted a race that only featured 19 cars, as did Spain, Monaco, and Miami before it. Max is showing the class and consistency that made Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher 7-time world champions. It was another consummate run, and a personal milestone in matching Ayrton Senna's 41 race wins, also marked an immense achievement by his Red Bull team in notching up a century of wins in style in Montreal. The debate over whether the Dutchman can be caught this season is over, but he and Red Bull are surely set to clock up even bigger numbers. There was a race behind him between Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, whose brake temperature problems almost let Lewis get in touching distance, but they were never in the same competition as Max. Mad Max, the tempestuous, over-eager, charging youngster that roared up to F1 8 years ago, is long gone. In his place stands a man who laughed at nearly losing control of his car on the same corner that ate up George Russell earlier on. His laugh was almost joyful, like a bored cafe worker seeing a cute dog outside, breaking the monotony of their day. The win brought his tally to 41, matching the late great Ayrton Senna. The victory was Red Bull's 100th, a remarkable milestone for the team which only joined F1 in 2005, taking over an ailing Jaguar team. In that relatively short time, they've developed into one of the biggest and most successful players in the sport. Derided in the past as a mere energy drink manufacturer, the team have laughed off such insults, instead playing up to their maverick image, racing hard and partying harder, and stressing their irreverent and unconventional approach. They are, without a doubt, the biggest winners of the Canadian Grand Prix, unlike the bird that got stuck behind Max Verklocken's front brake duct halfway through the race, and was still there by the end, which was a very unfortunate loser. Speaking of losers, George Russell. Well, I don't think he's an actual loser, but he definitely lost last weekend. He started the race fine, didn't gain anything, didn't lose anything. He just tucked in behind Alonso for a few laps before a small but distinct gap started to open, losing him DRS and leaving him in an awkward oasis between an Aston Martin and an Alpine by lap 12. But his aim for the race was always to be battling for a podium, even if it was only with his teammate Lewis Hamilton. But Hamilton has won in Canada 7 times, and that track knowledge was on show, as he found a few attempts here and there to pull roughly 5 seconds clear of his teammate as the race started to open up. George was pushing. He knew he had to stop the gap opening further, and in his haste to catch those in front of him, he made a fatal error. At the turn 8-9 chicane, he completely missed his line through the left-hander, straddling the sausage curb, going airborne, and as he landed, losing the rear end and smacking his back right tyre into the wall. It looked like he tried to get back on the power too quickly, which snapped his rear end out. He made it back to the pits though. A safety car let him recatch the pack, and then he started making moves. So it wasn't the end of the world really. Points were very much still on the table. That was until lap 55, when he went from being attached to Alex Albon's rear wing in 8th position to the pit lane. He had spent the last 10 or so laps finding clean air behind the Williams on the straights, instead of trying to slipstream past it. Obviously there was a cooling issue for much of the race, and after many laps in traffic, his brakes just got too hot, and he had to retire or suffer a brake failure. Mercedes hadn't expected him to run 40 laps in traffic, and their brake cooling wasn't set up for it. The track in Canada has a lot of heavy braking due to its big straights and slow corners, and Russell's Mercedes was a victim to that. The man that kept him in that traffic, and most of the midfield actually, was one of the biggest winners. Alex Albon, in an upgraded Williams car, drove an absolute blinder, earning himself driver of the day. Joke all you want about the simplicity of their underfloor, the FW45 is fast in a straight line, and despite a number of challenges during the race, no one could best it, even with DRS. This was a race that was always going to suit them, but Alex, with his famous Albon defending, to quote his race engineer, made the most of it. After topping Q2, it was clear the team had made improvements, but surely they weren't ever expecting a 7th place finish. Since Bahrain, Albon's last point score, Williams have been outdeveloped, but with a new package on the Thai British drivers' car this weekend, they returned to being points challengers. We will have to wait to see it on Logan Sargeant's car before we know if it really is good though, or if Albon just drove out of his skin. And let's be clear, this was a great drive, not just the luck of having a car that's fast in a straight line. He started 9th on the grid, moving past both McLarens on his way to his biggest points finish since leaving Red Bull. A huge winner and the rightful owner of the driver of the day at the Canadian Grand Prix. But while he may have been a winner, his teammate Logan Sargeant fell into an unfortunate category of losers. I'm talking about some of the team's second drivers. I know Formula 1 teams don't officially have second drivers normally, but Logan Sargeant, Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll and even Carlos Sainz, who we'll come back to later, had a tough few days at the office. Perez failed to get out of Q2 for the 3rd race in a row, during which time Max has taken every pole position and led every single lap. Sergio's short-lived title challenge has been replaced by some abysmal form, and despite recovering to 6th, he simply was not good enough. Logan Sargeant, with his unupgraded Williams, failed to finish 10 laps due to a mechanical issue. And Lance Stroll. Well, what can I say about Lance Stroll that hasn't already been said? I had faith earlier in the season when it was technical issues and bad luck holding him back, but in Canada he missed out on Q3 by over a second. And while 13th to 9th isn't bad, his teammate was once again comfortably the 2nd fastest driver on track. Daddy has some tough decisions to make this summer, I think. That brings us to Carlos Sainz, the least deserving second driver of the lot. His unexciting consistency does nothing to interest the Ferrari pit wall, as they constantly told him to hold position and not fight Leclerc, despite the Monegasque being all over the place this year. Yes, Charles can pull off the incredible, but when he doesn't, his mistakes are costly. Carlos claimed to have the pace to pass Leclerc a few times, but the team always told him to not fight, comforting Charles with a message that Carlos was not a threat. Could he have done it? Who knows, but Ferrari's refusal to even let him try put him firmly in his place, and probably solidified his plans of finding somewhere else to drive in the future. Finally, the most paying team in Formula 1, Haas, and more specifically Nico Hülkenberg. He had qualified an incredible 2nd in Saturday's grid-deciding session, taking advantage of wet conditions to slot between pole-sitting Red Bull driver Max Verstappen and the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso. He was the last driver to get a lap in on the intermediate tyres before a red flag was followed by more rain, essentially ending the session with 7 minutes left. I cannot begin to explain how excited I was to see a Haas on the front row. Sure, I knew it wouldn't last, but still the image of Nico Hülkenberg going into turn 1 side by side with Max Verstappen filled my dreams that night, as I slept blissfully unaware that he had picked up a 3-place grid penalty for speeding under red flag conditions. The driver had just finished his fastest lap and had started another push lap, read the report from the stewards, who also gave Hülkenberg a penalty point. He was at turn 1 when the red flag was displayed. However, at that point, he was already 1.5 seconds over his delta time. He claimed this made it extremely difficult for him to come below the delta in the next sector. The regulation is very clear, and whilst there's no question of the driver acting dangerously or driving unsafely, there was a breach and thus a penalty has to be imposed. So, despite Hülkenberg not driving dangerously in any way whatsoever, he was demoted to 5th. Still a good place to be as a Haas, but come on. Can't the FIA let us be happy and enjoy the image of a Haas on the front row? He was never going to stay there for long as his car demolished its tyres and slid back to its customary place, fighting for pride, not points at the back of the field. Haas are once again struggling this year, and Nico Hülkenberg's 10th-place drop down from the starting grid encapsulated it perfectly. Occasionally good in qualifying, rarely good in the race. I just hope they can turn it around at some point. Now it's your turn. Who were the winners and losers of the Canadian Grand Prix? Let us know in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.